Liza came to the Salinas Valley, all the level land was taken. The rich bottoms, the little fertile graces in the hills, the forest, but there still was marginal land to be homesteaded, and in the barren hills, to the east of what is now King City, Samuel Hamilton homesteaded. He followed the usual practice. He took a quarter section for himself and a quarter section for his wife, and since she was pregnant, he took a quarter section for the child. Over the years, 9 children were born, 4 boys and 5 girls. And with each birth, another quarter section was added to the ranch, and that makes 11 quarter sections, or 1,760 acres. If the land had been any good, the Hamiltons would have been rich people, but the acres were harsh and dry. There were no springs. The crust of the topsoil was so thin that the flinty bones stuck through. Even the sagebrush struggled to exist, and the oaks were dwarfed from the lack of moisture. Even in reasonably good years, there was so little feed that the cattle kept thin, running through and looking for enough to eat. From their barren hills, the Hamiltons could look down to the west and see the richness of the bottom land and the greenness around the Salinas River. Samuel built his house with his own hands, and he built a barn and a blacksmith shop. He found quite soon that even if he had 10,000 acres of hill country, he could not make a living on the bony soil without water. His clever hands built a well-boring rig, and he bored wells on the lands of luckier men. He invented and built a threshing machine, and moved through the bottom farms in harvest time, threshing the grain his own farm could not raise. And in his shop, he sharpened plows, and mended arrows, and welded broken axles and shod horses. Men from all over the district brought him tools to mend and to improve. Besides, they loved to hear Samuel talk of the world and its thinking, and of the poetry and philosophy that were going on outside of the Salinas Valley. He had a rich, deep voice, both good in song and in speech, and while he had no brogue, there was a rise and lilt and a cadence to his talk that made it sound sweet in the ears of the taciturn farmers from the valley bottom. They brought whiskey, too, and out of sight of the kitchen window and the disapproving eye of Miss Hamilton, they took hot nips from the bottle and nibbled cuts of green wild anise to cover the whiskey breath. It was a bad day when 3 or 4 men were not standing around the forge, listening to Samuel's hammer and his talk. They called him a comical genius, and carried in his stories carefully home, and they wondered at how the stories spilled out that way, for they never sounded the same repeated in their own kitchens. Samuel should have been rich from his well rig, and his threshing machine, and his shop, but he had no gift for business. His customers always pressed for money, promised payment after harvest, and then after Christmas, and then after, until at last they forgot it. Samuel had no gift for reminding them, and so the Hamiltons stayed poor. The children came along as regularly as the years. The few overworked doctors of the county did not often get to the ranches for birth unless the joy turned nightmare and went on several days. Samuel Hamilton delivered all of his own children and tied the cords himself. always pulled tight back and bun behind it in a hard knot. And since I can't remember how she dressed, it must have been that she wore clothes that matched herself exactly. She had no spark or humor, and only occasionally a blade of cutting wit. She frightened her grandchildren because she had no weakness. She suffered bravely and uncomplainingly through life, convinced that that was the way her God wanted everyone to live. She felt that rewards came later. When people first came to visit the West, particularly from the owned and fought over farmlands of Europe, and saw so much land to be had for the signing of a paper and the building of a foundation, an itching land greed seemed to come over them. They wanted more and more land, good land if possible, but land anyway. Perhaps they had filaments in memory of feudal Europe, where great families came and remained great because they owned things. The early settlers took up land they didn't need and couldn't use. They took up worthless land just to own it, and all the proportions changed. A man might have been well-to-do on 10 acres in Europe, but was rat poor on 2,000 in California. It wasn't very long until all the land in the barren hills near King City and San Ardo was taken up, and ragged families were scattered through the hills, trying their best to scratch up a living from the thin, flinty soil. They and the coyotes lived clever, despairing, submarginal lives. They landed with no money, no equipment, no tools, no credit, and particularly with no knowledge of the new country and no technique for using it. I don't know whether it was divine stupidity or great faith that let them do it. Surely such venture is nearly gone from the world, and the families did survive and grow. They had a tool or a weapon that is also nearly gone, or perhaps it is only dormant for a while. It is argued that because they believed thoroughly in a just, moral God, they could put their faith there and let the smaller securities sit